That was off a 140-mile-an-hour serve. Look at this. This is unbelievable.
Well, what's going on, guys? It's Coach Steven with 15 Points of Tennis. And a lot of players can manipulate a still ball very well when it's still, when it's not moving a whole lot. But when players get balls with a lot of pace, angle, or spin coming through their strike zone, well, a lot of the players who take big, healthy cuts at the ball get in trouble, and the ball is going everywhere but the court. See, guys, as you progress on your tennis journey, you have to start to know and learn how to modify your stroke to fit the scenario at hand, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So, if you haven't watched the last two videos I did on stop and pop, I highly recommend you go back and watch those before continuing with this video, okay? Because we're going to talk about that a lot today. So stop and pop, guys, is not unique to tennis. I actually worked with a player who played on the Stanford baseball team, and he's telling me they do it all the time in baseball and in golf, okay? Most times you see the players swing and fall through all the way when they're going for distance, obviously. But there's a specific shot in golf that Tiger Woods uses called the stinger, where he actually hits and stops about right here. He doesn't fall through all the way. And the stinger comes up low and flat, and Tiger calls that his control shot if he wants to put the ball on the fairway every single time. All right, now, similar to golf, stop and pop in tennis is going to be your control shot for hitting accurately and precisely when hitting the ball flat. So this is more than just a developmental tool, guys. This will be an ultra reliable shot if you need to put the ball on the fairway. So this video will be a little bit different. We're gonna actually go through a few shots that are ideal for stop and pop. Okay, but first, before we do that, you have to understand the spectrum of stop and pop, all right? So when we stop and pop, all right, think about it like a spectrum, okay? Because there's different varieties of stop and pop. It comes in different varieties. So you can either stop right here like really hard. I can either stop right here like this to stop and pop, or I can swing and finish like a couple feet past my contact point, maybe a foot or two past my contact point like this, right? So that's a stop and pop. This is a stop and pop. They're both varieties. There's both versions of stop and pop. And as we go through the video, I'm going to refer to this right here as a hard stop and pop, and this right here as a light stop and pop. So first are examples of the hard stop and pop, stopping right at contact. And in a sec, you're going to see the soft stop and pop, like this one, a few feet past contact. So guys, when you're out there playing, the harder you stop and pop, right here, the more focused your contact point will be. So the harder my opponent hits the ball into my strike zone, the more pace I have to work with, the harder I'm going to tend to stop and pop. Now, I mentioned in the previous video, when I stop right here, so the harder you stop, you're actually slowing the racket head down as opposed to accelerating fast through the strike zone, through the contact point. But if I'm working with a lot of pace, if I'm using pace, I don't need to get a little bit more acceleration. It's going to be more beneficial for me to get a good contact point and to deflect the pace. Now, if I get a little bit of a softer ball and I still want to stop and pop for control, I'm going to, instead of a hard stop and pop here, like on a return, I'm going to, or if someone hits it really hard, right? If the ball's a little softer, I'm going to do a light stop and pop just like that, okay? And that gives me just a touch more racket head speed. Now, the other benefit of stop and pop, big benefit, and we're going to use to deflect pace, and we're going to talk about some shots later, is the fact that you're stopping at contact, you know exactly where. It's very easy to feel the angle of the string. So whether I'm going line, cross, right, getting on top of the ball and hitting the ball down, or lobbing, by stopping at contact, remember, if your strings are just a little bit off at contact, just the slightest angle change from here to here can send your shot flying. So this will help you feel a lot better exactly where you're aiming the ball. Now on the heavy ball like this, I'm going to do the hard stop and pop, but watch the angle of the strings. Just stopping right there, I have much more control over the racket head. Okay, it's normally a pretty tough ball to aim. Now look, I was super early in reaching on that one. Obviously I won't be able to angle the strings. But if I time the ball better, okay, that's decent aim off a pretty deep heavy ball. And here's that nice and light stop and pop for a little bit more acceleration. Now maybe the question you might be asking, what is the downside to stop and pop? Well, first off, because we're actually slowing the racket head down at contact by stopping, this stop and pop puts a cap on the upper limit of how much power you can get. So if I want to hit like slow balls really hard with stop and pop, it takes so much energy to swing and stop it, and I'm not getting the full acceleration through the ball. So when you're getting your average slower rally ball, you should accelerate through. Okay, especially if you're trying to put the ball away and create pace, floaters, sitters in the court, where you need that extra racket head acceleration. Okay, follow through, take a full swing, take a crack at it. If you need to hit heavy topspin to get the ball up and down, definitely a full swing. But the one thing stop and pop doesn't really have much downside for is if you're hitting the ball flat. And why is that? So when you hit the ball flat, you don't need a whole lot of racket head speed to hit the ball pretty fast and hard, because a flat ball by nature moves through the court so fast, but as we all know, flat balls don't have much margin over the net. So most of the players who hit hard and flat aren't looking to get extra pace on the ball with racket head speed. They're normally trying to get a little bit more precision and stability at contact. So that's why you see a lot of the flatter players stop and pop a little bit more, especially the backhands, because their backhands are flatter for two hands. You see a lot of the two-handed backhands stop and pop. Nick Kyrgios, Marat Safin, and these are some of the best backhands. They stop and pop all the time, okay, maybe on at least half of their backhands, all right? And these guys are so strong anyways, they don't mind taking a little bit off their maximum power just so they can hit consistent and hit their spots and hit their corners, okay, and get a little bit more control from the stop and pop. I won't be able to rip the ball hard with stop and pop, but what I can do is play highly controlled shots and place the ball very well with that extra increase in contact point. Most of you guys are going to use this on like the two-handed backhand, or if you're in a flat ball hitting contest and want that extra control and extra precision to control the height of the ball over the net, I'm just taking it early and using the pace and keeping it low with a light stop and pop. And here are stop and pops on the one-handed forehand that are disguised as a full swing, but we're going to talk in a sec why they look like a full swing. Alright guys, now last thing before we begin. Alright, when we're stopping and popping, it's a little easier, and quite obviously, it's easier to stop and pop with a two-handed stroke compared to a one-handed stroke. Obviously, because you have two hands, it's easier to hit the brakes. So when you hit your one-handed forehand, okay, it's going to look like a bit of a lighter stop and pop. Okay, you can probably stop and pop hard on the backhand. If you're hitting a really hard shot, maybe you see Federer go like this and stop and pop, right? Otherwise, most of your stop and pop is going to be like that. Okay, that's going to be a version of your stop and pop. It's not going to look like this quite necessarily in a match. The second thing is your front side muscles, so you're accelerating on your forehand, is normally going to be a little bit stronger than your backside muscles, like the backside of your forearm, for instance. So that's why even if I'm hitting a one-handed backhand, I don't really have the strength on a one-handed backhand. It's easier for me to stop right here than it is to stop right here, so that's why the forehand will go through just a little bit more right here for a stop and pop, right? If you're hitting a stop and pop on the one-handed forehand. So just one thing to note. So without further ado, let's get into some of the different shots that are ideal for this. And again, broad umbrella, anything with pace. And what I mean by pace, number one, hit that's struck hard with a lot of speed through your strike zone. Number two, if a ball lands deep, okay, it's going to feel a lot heavier. So deep balls are good for stop and pop. Or number three, if the balls have a lot of heavy topspin, it's going to make that ball feel a lot heavier where you need that extra control from the stop and pop. Okay, but let's take care of the easy one first, and that's the volley. When you volley, almost all your volleys, you should be stopping and popping. Almost all of them. When you watch the pros volley, they're here, 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 here. Like, you never see anyone volley like this and follow through, right? It's always stopping at contact. And the only shots you should be following through on are your overheads and your swing volleys. Okay, it's just because you're so close to the net and you have so much pace to work with, control takes a little bit more priority over power. Now, guys, even with my swing volleys, and this goes for me personally, I will still a lot of times stop and pop on my swing volleys. And I know I told you before, I'm not the most coordinated player. I think taking a full crack at a full swing on swing volleys, I have a hard time timing it. So I'd rather just short to my swing, stop and pop like this, and at least for my level, it's typically good enough, all right? All right, just to remind you guys, a little stop and pop on the volley. Now, if you've watched the first two videos on stop and pop and recoil, you'll know that it's extremely effective on the volley. And stop and pop should be the default. Now, for the other situations, swing volleys, overheads, and I've seen players just swing at pretty much everything and they're successful at. Stop and pop is just an option. It's definitely not mandatory. Alright, but see how this is hit from deep? And I stop and pop right there. If the lob was a little shorter, like this, then you can swing a little bit more. But if you have a lot of pace to work with on the lob, why not stop and pop? Now, the next shot, okay, the second shot you want to really think about using stop and pop a lot on. If you can't stop and pop, you can't return. Think about that, all right? Remember, guys, a return is pretty much like a volley. So if you watch me volley, split, boom, volley, split, volley, split, volley, split, volley, right? You don't volley like this, and you probably won't return like this. A lot of the best returners in the world, if you watch the pros, it's like, right? And if the serve, especially for those hard first serves, you're going to stop and pop hard here, hard here, right? There's going to be very, very little follow through. The only time you can take a full crack and follow through is if you stand way far behind the baseline, like Rafael Nadal, and hit a ground stroke style return, or if your opponent floats that ball nice and soft, yeah, maybe you can take a full crack at it or do more of a lighter stop and pop, okay? But that's very, very critical if you want to be a good returner. I'll say it again, stop and pop is like the most important thing on the return, like the most important thing. So these are volley style returns where he's splitting and going right into the stroke, hitting it like a volley. It's different from a ground stroke style return if you're 500 feet behind the baseline, okay? As you can see, he's still a little too early on some of these returns. Either too far out in front, so he's got to actually wait for the ball to come to him. He actually has more time than he thinks, but that's a separate issue. As you can see, he's just stopping it nice and hard right there, and then he has control over the shot. Now these are the second serve returns. Actually, it's one of his best shots, so we'll feature it for a little while longer. He can really lay into some of these. But a nice light stop and pop should do it, especially if you're inside the court and you have some pace to work with. For you guys who, again, like to stand far behind the baseline and shuffle your feet and not hit a ground stroke style return, then this won't necessarily apply. Now, you've seen this one before, a hard stop and pop. I've found it's a little bit better to hard stop and pop when you're at full stretch, because You're already a little bit off balance, so you need that a little extra stability to get it deep, to place it, at least make the ball in, get some contact point. You've seen this before as well, a nice and light stop and pop if I'm going to drive the ball and be more aggressive. Right, but here I actually played almost a whole set only stopping and popping, and to be honest, it was kind of annoying. Like that last ball I wanted to take a full swing because you're just so limited in terms of power. That was a good one to stop and pop on. This is another stop and pop, but you get the point.
On the court. There's well.
Wow, good fellow countrymen.
Well, no wonder people stand.
All right, the next shot you might not really think about right away is actually stop and popping for shots on the rise. Okay, now because the ball's coming on the rise, gravity hasn't had time to really take its effect, so you're going to have a lot more pace to work with. But what's also unique about the on the rise is that the sharp vertical angle it's coming up at. So if that vertical angle is coming up straight like this and hits a level surface that's perpendicular to the ground, it will actually bounce up, right? So when the ball's coming sharp on the rise, depending how much on the rise you hit the ball, you really need to get those strings angled down to keep it in the court. So that's why stop and pop is perfect to help you get those strings right here, to get those strings facing the right direction. Really aim that ball, okay, and get it down into the court. Many players often forget that on the rise, a lot of times you see the ball inside the court. So on the rise, you think you need to get up there and create pace for an on the rise shot. That's actually incorrect. On the rise, because it has so much pace to work with, you actually are deflecting pace for an on the rise shot, not creating pace. So most times just come up there and use the pace moving forward instead of trying to create your own pace, right? And stop and pop on the forehand side works extremely well also, especially if you're learning on the rise, you better be practicing stop and pop. So if you're terrible at on the rise, you should go out and practice this tomorrow. Right? With the stop and pop, he's just using the pace, and if you look at where I'm standing, it's like 10 feet behind the baseline. I'm giving him a lot of pace to work with. See, that one, the contact point was way too far in front, and the spacing and timing was bad. He's got to time it better. So that's a pretty good adjustment. And if you did this, if you could do this in a match, I mean, what's wrong with doing this in a match, right? It's not bad. You could use it. So now we're running a play with the on the rise where he's hitting a heavy one, and the next ball he's hitting it down. Now this is his normal swing, but he's so used to getting on top of the ball and deflecting pace, which most players aren't used to doing if you're not good at on the rise. You should have seen the first, when I started working with the student on this a few weeks back, every single ball on the rise, he would hit it long, and obviously I explained why, right? The angle of the racket, right? Now this is one of his go-to plays, especially if you're a smaller player. Do not let the ball get up high on you.
Listen, feel, oh, watch out. That went in.
That's outrageous.
Talk about the magic.
Thanks guys. Now on the second part of this video, we're going to keep the same format and go 3 more shots on the stomp and pop. So if you enjoyed this video and don't want to miss it, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you very, very soon.
Feel there's something that is. I feel there's something that is. I feel there's something that is stopping me now.